Hello and welcome to Ewar 104, also known as Counter Ewar. This class is slightly different to the other three Ewar classes that I've taught. Ewar 101 to 103 are intended to help you become an Ewar pilot, whereas Ewar 104 is mostly to help you understand a little bit more about some of the other modules which are rarely used in EVE, but some of them can be used effectively in PvP scenarios, and they may provide useful to you in certain ship fitting scenarios. This class assumes that you've attended or listened to Ewar 102, which is the ship fitting Ewar class. The others are not essential, but you should be able to get a little bit more out of this class if you have attended those or listened to those as well. I'll just briefly introduce myself. My name's Miranda Glade. I'm an ex-Unista, so I'm an E-UNI graduate. I'm also an ex-mentor, teacher, and captain of the ILN. I left E-UNI to join Noble Sentiments, which is an aggressive NBSI PvP corps, where I get to continue my training in Ewar as well as other PvP matters. So for Counter Ewar, there are usually three kinds of modules for each Ewar type to counter that particular Ewar type. One is usually a low slot module, which requires no capacitor and doesn't need to be activated, is always active. Another is a medium slot module, which requires activation and uses cap. And the third is a medium slot module also uses cap, but is a remote module, so therefore is activated on a friendly ship. First example is for tracking disruption. The low slot example for tracking disruption is the tracking enhancer. Then in the medium slot there is a module called the tracking computer. Tracking computer can use scripts similar to the Ewar module itself, and then there is the remote medium slot module, which is a tracking link. It's important to remember that tracking enhancers, tracking computers, and tracking links are all effective in improving your tracking, and you don't need to have someone E-warring you with a tracking disruptor for them to be useful. They can still improve your tracking range, in other words your optimal range and fall off, as well as your tracking speed of your turret-based weapons. Next we have remote sensor dampening. The low slot module to counter that is a signal amplifier. Then in the medium slot there is a sensor booster, and remote medium slot is a remote sensor booster. Again, just like the low slot modules in the tracking disruptor group, that is the tracking enhancer, the signal amplifier doesn't use cap, sensor booster does use cap, and you can put scripts in it, and then the remote sensor booster needs to be activated on a friendly ship in order to function. You can also use target painters as an aggressive Ewar type to counter the effects of remote sensor damping, but remember that things like remote sensor boosters, and signal amplifiers are useful to your ships even when there is no enemy Ewar around. The next category is target painting. There are actually no counter modules for target painting, but there are things you can do to still reduce your signature radius of your ship as much as possible. So one of the things you can consider is using an afterburner instead of a micro-warp drive. Another thing is, instead of using an inertia stabilizer, simply use nanofiber internal structures. In both cases, you don't get quite as good a bonus to certain ship properties. So in the case of an afterburner versus a micro-warp drive, you won't be going as quickly, or in the case of nanofiber internal structure as opposed to inertia stabilizers, you won't be as agile. But people generally avoid using inertia stabilizers on all PvP ships, and people very seriously consider keeping micro-warp drives active for a long time on PvP ships as well. This isn't to say that you can't fit them at all, it just means that you have to be cautious in terms of how you fit them. Heaps of people use micro-warp drives often, but they don't necessarily run them for extended periods. In the case of inertia stabilizers, though, not many people fit them, I have to admit. The next category is electronic countermeasures, or ECM. The low slot module to counter ECM is a sensor backup array. Sensor backup arrays are racial, so you have to fit one which matches your ship's sensors. There is a multiracial version of it which actually has exactly the same stats, but is just larger when you want to ship it, so it takes up more room in a cargo hold. But otherwise it's identical. The medium slot module is an electronic countermeasures module, also known as ECCM. They are also racial, and there is also a multiracial variant. However, that one is not as good. It requires more cap. And finally, there is projected ECCM. Luckily, projected ECCM is non-racial, so you only have to worry about using one module, and you can activate it on any friendly. Of course, there are also two further ways to counter ECM, one of which is to just get in a bigger ship, or one which has better sensor strength in the first place, and the other is just to ECM them first, of course. This concludes Ewar 104, and it's also the last of my Ewar classes. If you like this class, please send me an email or a forum post. If you have suggestions for improvements or you have ideas for other classes, also you can send me an email, or you can find me in the Noble Sentiments public channel. You might also be able to find some of my corp mates who can give you some tips on flying or fitting Ewar. Finally, if you have any Ewar experiences, feel free to drop me a line and tell me about them. I'm always interested to learn about other people's Ewar experiences in PvP, so don't hesitate to drop me a line. Have fun out there and get some good kills.